Hey everyone, we're going to carry on with Afif's conversation on Hamza's den when he starts talking to Subboor, and I'll play a little bit from the end of the last video just to set the scene.
When I used to be a Muslim and I used to pray, right, I used to never get a response from the other side, right? So it was just like I was talking to myself, right, when I was actually praying. Or when I went to the Umrah, right, and I did Umrah around the Kaaba, and I went around the Kaaba several times, but there was no Allah there, there were no angels there were no demons there. It's as if everything is just made up in somebody's mind when they actually believe in Islam, right?
Okay, so again, we're going back to Islam, but just before that, just before we get into prayers and how they're answered and this kind of thing, the question is, why would atheism be a better explanation for you than theism when it comes to something as simple as the design of the world, right? The design,
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so just a recap there of Afif to show he was arguing about Islam and that disproving Muhammad disproves Allah. Subboor's already tried to push him off this question twice to talk more generally about theism or deism, and here he is dodging Afif once again.
Right. So basically, the problem is with special creation. The fact is that evolution seems to be a much better explanation for the origin and for the development of life on Earth than special creation.
You know, evolution doesn't undermine the existence of God. Like if someone was to believe in the tree of life and they're to believe that all organisms go back to a last universal common ancestor, and this happened through some sort of natural mechanism, that would not preclude the agency of God. That would simply mean that the mechanism has been fully understood. So it would challenge the story of Adam and Eve. It would challenge other accounts that certain Christians have about how life originated.
You'd notice how Subboor says evolution would challenge Adam and Eve and other Christian explanations for life, but fails to mention that's also true of Islam. He's acting as if Islam isn't dependent upon the same Adam and Eve story, and therefore would be subject to the same disapproval through evolution if you were taking that story literally, which Subboor does. And we know he does because he's claimed to be writing a book since 2015 that would somehow show evolution not to be correct, and 8 years on we're still waiting. But see how he's tried to talk as if it would only affect the Christian belief and it wouldn't challenge the Islamic one.
However, it has nothing to do with atheism. Evolution, to use evolution, in the words of Elliot Sober, the philosopher of biology, to use evolution to support atheism, you need additional philosophical premises. It's not the case that evolution itself is sufficient to necessitate atheism.
Yeah, and at no point does Afif make that claim. He says that it would disprove the Islamic God, which Subboor is well aware of, and why he's pushing the conversation towards a generic God, which Afif did not call up to talk about. I mean, it's a classic example of the Subboor shift where he will not address Islam.
Right. I believe that atheism at least refutes the Islamic God, the God that's mentioned in the Quran and the Hadith.
Yeah, but that's getting away from the point that we were discussing.
Yes, yes.
No, it's not. It's returning to the point after you keep pulling the conversation away from Islam because you're too much of a coward to defend your religious claims. I think at this point, Afif should have insisted they talk about the Islamic God, as Subboor he's clearly trying to chew up the clock and make a different argument.
About design, and then when it came to design, you said evolution, and I showed you that evolution cannot actually undermine God's existence in of itself. It needs additional premises.
You didn't show him anything. Afif never made that claim, and you just made a drawn-out explanation for something no one would disagree with to keep him from talking about Islam.
What are the additional premises needed, and what's the justification for them in order for evolution to be used for atheism? What do you know about this?
Yeah, because atheism is the default position, right? If you're making a positive claim that there's a God.
That's not true at all. I could say Islam is the default position.
Yeah, you could say that, and you'd need to back that stupid claim up with a good reason. You can give a good reason for atheism being the default position, though.
Right? I mean, where did you come up with atheism as the default position?
The fact is that if something exists, right, you have to give positive proof that it exists, right? Otherwise, the default is that it doesn't exist.
That's not true.
Yeah, of course it's true, because the alternative is that we just accept your position that Allah exists without any evidence. And we're not going to do that.
That's not true at all. I'll give you evidence for that. The world is real. Do I need to provide evidence for the world is real?
Yes, if you make that claim.
No, that's not true.
Yes, it is true. And if you can't give reasons and evidence for your claim, no one has a good reason to believe it. Just like for your religion.
It's a self-evident truth. The world is real. And
It's not a self-evident truth. It may be something that is easy to demonstrate through the fact that we detect the world of our senses and we can interact with it. But those are some of the reasons you would still need to give to support the claim.
by the way, you can never prove the world is real. You can't actually ever prove the world is real.
And now he's essentially appealing to like solipsism. We can't know for anything, we can't know anything for certain outside of our own minds. I mean, I think that's a pointless philosophical dead end to take. But more importantly, it's not something that Subboor believes. So once again, he's just throwing in more distractions so he can avoid talking about Islam.
It's a self-evident truth. It's an
No, it's fucking not. How many more times are you going to repeat that?
atheist cliche that every single thing needs empirical evidence.
That's not an atheist cliche, since no atheist worth their salt would ever say that everything needs empirical evidence. I mean, this is just shit you make up as a feeble deflection tactic, because the claims you make for Islam being true do require empirical evidence, and you can't provide any.
Because if every single thing did need empirical evidence, then you'd have an infinite regress of questions and no one would know anything.
No, that's just fucking babble. That's nothing to do with why not everything needs empirical evidence. I mean, some things can potentially be known without empirical evidence. I mean, for example, if you're using the laws of logic, we know you can't have a married bachelor because it would break the law of non-contradiction. You don't need to go out and gather empirical evidence on every human male to determine that. So, yeah, I mean, Jesus, boy, you can't get anything right, can you?
So what's going on here is that you have some basic propositional problems in your epistemology.
You've not pointed out a single thing wrong with his epistemology. It's just another baseless claim.
You believe for someone to say something exists that they have to provide evidence. That's not necessarily true.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is necessarily true.
It's true in some cases and not true in others.
No, it's true in all cases.
What I'm interested in is what makes you think atheism is the default position.
I mean, you see this? I mean, it's not even a hope of getting back to the topic of Islam here, because Subboor will just keep making rambling statements full of errors and keep piling on questions to keep him off topic. You're a coward, Subboor.
I'll tell you why. Think about it like this. Like if you tell somebody, like, let's say I tell you that I have a sibling, right? Like a brother or a sister, then you would tell me that, okay, show me evidence that you have a brother or sister. And then I would just bring them in front of me, and then you would talk to them, and then you would know that they exist, right? Because you would have empirical evidence. But you can't tell me that, bring me evidence that you don't have a sibling, because the default position is that you don't unless you're able to prove it, right? So whoever makes a claim, they have to provide the evidence for it.
That's a disanalogy.
It's not a disanalogy because he didn't give an analogy. He gave an example that was perfectly coherent. An analogy is a comparison between two things. An example is an illustration, a for instance, that explains a general premise. They're not the same thing. I mean, for years, Subboor's been trotted out as some kind of Dawa philosopher king, and yet he doesn't even understand what an analogy is. I mean, then again, I've yet to talk to a Muslim that does, so I shouldn't be too surprised.
That's a disanalogy because that particular example, if we were...
Yeah, there you go, an example. Well done.
...to switch it over and replace it with a different variable in which you would say you would say I have a dad, right? Now I have a dad and I have a mom, I have parents, right? Now the onus is not on you to prove it. In this particular case, the very fact that you exist is empirical evidence that you had parents.
No, not just by itself, but a thief, I think, explains this later in the video, so I'll leave it to him.
So when it comes to the design of the universe and the design of biological organisms, that itself, the first intuitive, rational, empirical inference that we're going to make is that there is a designer.
No, that's bullshit. And also, see how he's like jumbling up contradictory words in that sentence. He says intuitive and empirical. You can't have a first inference about design that is both of those things. Intuition is a gut feeling about what is right. It's instinct without reasoning. Empiricism is evidence-based. So almost every sentence that comes out of Subboor's mouth it's incoherent or completely contradictory.
The most absurd and the most difficult assertion to make is that there's no designer. Hence
That's just another baseless claim which you can't back up with anything.
why what we find is throughout time, the vast majority of people looked at biological organisms and concluded there's a God. And
No, they already believed in a God. They didn't become convinced of a God because they were studying biological organisms. You've got it completely backwards.
interestingly, when Darwin presented the origin of species, he still actually believed in God.
Yeah, it's totally irrelevant.
So for someone to like just stick to your example, if you say I have a sister, then yes, you need to provide evidence for that. But if you say you have a father, you don't need to, because you're the evidence that you have a father.
Yeah, I mean, you're repeating the same mistake that you did before there, Subboor. But as I said, I think Afif talks about this and he'll correct you, so I'll let him do it.
Likewise, design that we actually see is evidence of a designer. And for
No, it's not. You're just inserting the word design into nature without any justification, just to call it design.
an atheist to say that actually there's no designer, then they need to go against the very intuition that we see before our eyes. So if anything,
Wrong again. An atheist doesn't need to go against anyone's intuition, because your gut feeling about the world doesn't mean shit. I mean, it's true an atheist who makes a positive claim that there is no God should provide reasons for that. I would say that's true, but that's a separate thing to what you're saying.
theism is the default position and atheism is an absurd position.
Absolutely not. You've made an error-strewn gish gallop of claims about anything to back that up.
And atheism actually needs to be supported by additional philosophical premises. And what often happens, and what's happened with you as well, Afif, is that you've thrown things out like evolution is an explanation for life.
Not once did Afif say that. I mean, mainly because evolution is not the explanation for life; it's the explanation for the development of life. You were the one who forced the conversation onto design and evolution when Afif came to talk about Muhammad making up Allah. And now you are making up stuff about what he said.
Yet you've still not provided any evidence that evolution actually necessitates atheism.
Yeah, because he never made that claim at any point. You brought up that evolution doesn't disprove a very general classical theistic God, which no one is disagreeing with. But then when Afif says it disproves the Islamic God, you refuse to address that and started down this road. You're asking him to provide evidence for a claim he hasn't made and a claim he doesn't believe, because you're too chicken shit to defend Islam.
And my basic discussions that I've been having with atheists for many years is they throw out these terms, but they don't understand the nuts and bolts of these things.
Really? You are going to say that atheists don't understand these things? I mean, if irony was a volcano, we'd all be buried in hot lava by now.
Yes, I believe design doesn't indicate a designer, because the reason we know about design is because, like, for example, you said the fact that you exist proves that your parents exist, right? We only know that because we see parents giving birth to children, right? It's not like it.
Yes, exactly, Afif. So we still do need evidence for the claim of parents existing, contrary to Subboor's false claim. It's just evidence that we already have from experience of how humans reproduce.
The knowledge just came, like, if you just had.
Okay. Look, that's false on two counts. The first thing is everybody agrees there's design. The Darwinists would say the design.
No, they don't. Evolutionary biologists who are not theists say we have the appearance of design. They don't say we have design.
Designer is natural selection, the blind watchmaker.
Oh, this is painful. I mean, the blind watchmaker is not a designer, you fucking idiot. The blind watchmaker was Richard Dawkins. He was referencing the watchmaker analogy made by theists. The blind part he added is to say the exact opposite, that you don't need a designer. And whatever appears designed is just that, appearance. Christ, does he get anything right?
Secondly, it's not true. I don't need to see your parents in order for me to understand that you do actually have parents. I don't need to do that.
No, but you need knowledge of human reproduction in place of that direct evidence, which is a distillation of the empirical evidence needed. So you're just wrong again, Subboor.
Yeah, but you need to see somebody's parents, right? It's not like
No,
there was just a person that was born and
no, you don't. In fact, what you're doing right now is you are essentially making an argument for special creationism.
What the fuck? How is that an argument for special creationism?
Because if we were to go with the idea that each individual species actually was created on its own and it doesn't have an evolutionary precursors, what a evolutionary biologist would say to us is that doesn't make any sense. We have to have species being linked back to other species, so smaller, lesser, fewer. So what you're actually doing is you're actually making an argument for special creationism.
How is what you just said confirming that he has made an argument for special creationism? You've just pulled that out of your ass without any coherent explanation. All Afif was saying was that we need evidence for our parents, and that evidence is seeing human reproduction or having knowledge of it. How is that him arguing for a special creation? I mean, I really wish at this point Afif had challenged him on this, because it was an obscenely stupid thing to say, and he kind of gets away with it, which is, yeah, it's a bit irritating.
By that assertion,
there's a big difference between natural phenomena and like and human design things, right? Like Hamza was talking about the complexity.
no, I don't.
So I mean, notice how Subboor goes on these long rambles, and yet he won't let Afif talk for more than 10 seconds without interrupting.
I don't agree with your definition there, because where even from an evolutionary perspective, right, this particular bottle is natural, even from an evolutionary perspective, because natural selection working on random mutations over millions of years, billions of years created me.
No, Subboor, evolution has nothing to say about whether a bottle is natural or not. Physics, which is what you've now ignorantly veered into, would describe the bottle as natural, as it's made up of the same elementary particles as everything else, and therefore it's part of the natural world. This is just another pointless diversion by Subboor.
And then I decided to design a bottle. So this is still considered natural. What is your definition of natural and supernatural?
What exists in nature versus what humans create.
What humans create is still natural, is still part of nature.
Yeah, but the things that create natural phenomena like rain, mountains, flowers, trees, they're different than what humans intelligently design, right? When humans I'll tell you why. Because when humans intelligently design something like a water bottle, they have a design in mind, and then they put all the parts together and build that in one go, right? That's what special creation is. Like Allah says in the Quran that Allah, built Adam with his own hands from clay and breathed into him. But natural phenomena, they're created by themselves over spans of millions of years.
Wait, that's an assumption.
I mean, you really are desperate now, Subboor. I mean, to say something that silly. We have got tons of evidence from all the scientists that study every aspect of our environment. They'll look at anything from tectonic plate movements to the weather cycle. Just a absolute ton of evidence that this is all natural phenomena, that it's no, need for a creator. It's clear at this point, Subboor just wants to belligerently argue every obvious point to just chew up the clock, as far as I can tell.
You just said natural phenomena is just basically create themselves, and these organisms that we have, they are generated by these natural processes by themselves. That's an assumption. That's an assertion.
No, it's not. It's backed up by all the evidence.
That's not evidence. You have to provide evidence for that. That's the very point we're arguing. So it's question begging for you to say that actually these things come about by themselves.
That's not question begging. For fuck's sake. Question begging is when the premise of an argument assumes the truth of the conclusion, okay? Which Afif didn't do. He made a statement that these events are natural processes, and he was in the process of explaining it until you interrupted it again. But it's not begging the question. I mean, seriously, Subboor, do you understand any of the words that you use? It's like he had like a bunch of post-it notes on his fridge with all the philosophical terms listed. and then another bunch of post-it notes with all the explanations. And they suddenly got all mixed up before we came live on Hamza's show because he just doesn't seem to understand any of this stuff.
Yeah, because we see them come about by themselves. We're not seeing any creator doing anything. Like,
Okay, fine. Let's take a butterfly.
There. So he refutes you in one sentence, and Subboor's now getting pissed off. So he jumps to another irrelevant question.
Right? Have you seen a butterfly come into existence by itself?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so what organism are you referring to?
Sorry, I didn't understand your question.
You said we see these things coming into existence by themselves. Who sees these things?
No. We see life forms developing, like we see organisms changing over time. Like I'm referring to evolution, but I think you're already you're making a false equivocation here. You're talking about the development of life, and we were talking about the origin of life.
At no point were you talking about the origin of life. You were talking about evolution and the default position of atheism, and then evidence for parents, and then how we know natural phenomena occur just by natural processes. You're just gaslighting him now because he's managed to navigate through all your diversions, and you've got nothing left apart from just lying, you slippery git.
Right, we don't know about the origin of life, right? We're ignorant about
that. So, okay, if we don't know about the origin of life, then all of your claims about the development of life to go against the idea, to try and prop up the idea, rather, that life came together without some sort of agency, it falls apart because we don't.
No, it doesn't fall apart. And he wasn't even making that claim in the first place. He was saying that evolution disproves Allah, a topic that you will not let him get onto.
Don't know how it began. Then you can't make claims about the development being evidence for atheism at all.
Yeah, and he never made that claim, Subboor.
Right. I think what you're saying is correct, but what I wanted to say is that evolution actually disproves the religious God Allah of Islam because of the special creation that's actually taught in the Quran and the Hadith, right?
Okay, so fine. We'll move on to that.
Yeah, of course you will.
But then I want you to concede the point that evolution does not undermine the general concept of a God at all, which is contrary to what you said earlier.
That's just a blatant lie. He never made that claim throughout the entire video. Subboor, you're just obscenely lying now. Despite what he said about moving on to the question of Islam, he never allows a conversation to go there either. And I think, honestly, at this point, I really would have called him out because he just put in words in your mouth. He's saying that he's claiming you're saying things that you never said in the conversation.
Yeah, that's true. But firstly, you're saying God, right? As in, I think you're already presupposing the God Allah, right? Because it could be any number of gods.
No. I'm not presupposing Allah. Why I use the word Allah is because Allah is the concept of God which is transcendent. So.
No, you use the word Allah because you're a Muslim and you are still dodging a thief's attempts to bring it back to Islam.
In German, it's Gott. In Chichewa, it's Molongo, whatever, right? The basic concept of a transcendent creator, the basic concept of a God. So if you want to use the word God, it's absolutely fine. The point here is nothing, absolutely nothing in the biological sciences can actually undermine the existence of God. And if anything,
yeah, but it can do that with the Islamic God, though. That's the point, and that's why you won't let him argue with that point.
It actually supports theism and shows why atheism is untenable.
That is absolute bullshit. I mean, the biological sciences have no position on the question of a generic God, and so it neither supports theism nor does it make atheism untenable. And it's just another blatant lie by Subboor. I mean, Afif, if you I know you'll probably be watching this. If you go on there again, hopefully you'll pick him up on stuff like this because he's just been allowed to get away with too many, blatant lies as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but there's a huge difference between things that are real and things that are imaginary, right? Like, think about this. Like, Allah is written about in a book, right? In the Quran, for example, right? You have like Harry Potter is written about in a book. You have Santa Claus, right? But these are all imaginary figures because they have no empirical evidence for them, right? So what's the difference between something that's imaginary and something that's real?
Wait a second. look, that's again a disanalogy. So if Harry Potter, they're speaking about, I don't know, whatever, some sort of weird thing, right? Voldemort or whatever it's called. Fine, there's no evidence of that. But when it comes to the biological world is evidence, empirical evidence, direct empirical evidence of a designer.
No, it's not. And it's certainly not evidence that the Islamic God is a designer.
But now that designer you're saying is, we can't say it's Allah. You're right. We can't say it's Allah right now. We have to provide evidence for why we believe it to be God, and then we have to provide evidence why we believe the Quran to be the word of God, or whatever to be the word of God. I agree with that. But what I'm surprised at is,
yeah, but you won't ever provide that evidence or even allow the conversations to take place.
You're not seeing the fact that the biological world that we actually have does not support atheism at all.
Yeah, he already agreed with that mundane point in the conversation, and you keep returning to it to avoid talking about fucking Islam.
And you haven't provided a single shred of evidence that supports atheism. Because if you carry on with this argument and we start speaking about, why evolution undermines the Abrahamic God, that's fine. But that would have meant that you've conceded that on the discussions that we had about biology in particular, then atheism is not the worldview that makes sense. It's actually theism. Because so far I've been making arguments for theism.
No, the biological sciences don't make a statement about either position, and Afif has never made that argument, you repetitive, gaslighting sophist.
You haven't made a single argument for atheism.
Yeah, you've made flawed arguments for theism, no arguments for Islam, and not even allowed Afif to make the argument against Islam because you're just too scared. Anyways, I'm going to stop it here because Hamza interrupts and it goes off on another tangent. I might cover that last bit of the conversation in a final video, but we've done kind of the core of Afif's time on there. And I thought he did as well as he can do, but Subboor just basically throwing so much rubbish at him, so many false statements, that it is difficult to keep up. So, Afif, my critical points, don't take them to heart. I think you did very well on everything. I'm just saying, like, in an ideal world, this is what I would have picked him up on. But anyway, I mean, what do we draw as a conclusion? Subboor spent, about 13 and a half minutes there just dodging, talking about Islam. Making claims that Afif said things that he didn't say. He misused a whole bunch of words that he doesn't understand, and he refused to talk about evolution, disproving Islam, as well as just keeping Afif off the actual topic that he called in to talk about. So this is just a great example of how Subboor, despite all his pretensions to some kind of academic pedigree, is just as dishonest, ignorant, and cowardly as every other Dawa apologist. I'll see you all in the next one.